Hey there, everybody. I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox, and welcome to the first ever midweek episode of the weekly Ratchet. I still have part 2 to cover of the 2025 Dice Tower Retreat in Orlando, Florida, with 14 games to cover. I don't have a moment to waste. Let's get to it right here on the weekly Ratchet. Yes, hello there, everyone, and welcome to another special episode of the Weekly Ratchet. I know I said that in the last episode, but this one's special because, well, it's the first ever decimal episode. I've decided to make this 75.5. This won't be a standard episode. There's not going to be any new games or any question of the week. I do have a question of the week out there from episode 75, so be sure to go and check that out and get your answer in for episode number 76. But for now, I'm going to be covering another 14 games that I played at the Dice Tower Retreat. Now, I've split these games up simply because I played so many of them, but I'm not just doing, the first 2 days and the last 3 days or something like that. I'm actually I've spread these out in terms of sort of complexity of the game, the popularity of the game, so on and so forth. So I've got some pretty hot titles here to cover in this episode, and I'm going to go ahead and reset the clock back to Tuesday evening. All right, I mentioned last episode that they sort of did a early open of the Dice Tower Retreat starting at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, and it closed at midnight. Usually the hall is open 24 hours a day, but it closed at midnight, reopened Wednesday morning. So the only game that we got in Tuesday evening at the pre-opening of the retreat was Brink, and I played this with my good friend Eric Johnson. I've known Eric for a number of years now, actually meeting him at the first retreat I attended in 2021. A fantastic guy to play games with, a great sense of humor, and just a good friend of mine. Brink is I believe the newest release from Ivy Studios. This is supposed to be something of a spiritual successor to the game of Moonrakers. Now, real quick, Moonrakers is a negotiation game. You're going to be taking on these missions using something of a deck building mechanism, although I have never found the deck building to be incredibly strong in that game. But you're basically playing cards to get symbols to match the requirements of these missions while possibly rolling threat dice to take damage. That threat will actually reduce your score. Completing the missions will advance your score, and the first player to simply get, I believe, to 10 points wins the game. Ivy Studios is very known for, negotiation and table talk type of games. They're very, very popular for it. They're also somewhat polarizing for it, as I personally am not a big fan of negotiation games. But this was a space game. It's very beautifully produced, so I did go ahead and sit down and play this. We had a 5-player playthrough. I also played this with Katie and Greg and one other gamer. And this one was really interesting. It was very unique. I gotta be careful not to keep saying the word interesting, but this is a worker placement game where you're placing these ships out onto this hexagonal grid of tiles. You start off with 5 tiles, and each of these tiles has a colored border around it. They have some symbols on that tile indicating resources and possibly actions that you can take at each of these tiles. Now, you have 3 ships that you're playing. You're gonna play all 3 of those ships in each round, and if I remember, there's only 3 rounds to the game. One of these ships is like a little flying saucer. It has to go in the middle of 1 hex. The other one kind of actually looks like a long ship. It almost kind of looks like a seafaring vessel, and it goes on the edge between 2 of these hexagonal tiles. The other one is a triangular ship, a little larger, and it goes at the point where 3 of these hexagonal tiles meet together. Whenever you place a ship, you're going to activate all the resources on all the tiles. You're going to take all the resources that those tiles may give you. Also, those tiles may have an action symbol. They may not have resources or actions, I should mention that, but you'll take all those actions as well in any order that you want if you want to. And then you're going to use these resources and these actions to sort of influence the game. And there's kind of a lot to cover, but there are actions that will simply give you action cards. These cards may kind of give you special abilities or things that you can do on your turn, maybe sort of bending the rules, maybe giving you an extra action, and they can be used at multiple phases throughout this game. I'll kind of come back to those. There is an edict action. I'll come back to that as well. There is an ambassador action, which lets you sort of acquire these cards from the board. They're going to give you powerful effects, maybe endgame scoring, things that you can do in each of your turns, etc. Some of these are instant effects, some of these are ongoing effects, some of them are endgame effects. It's standard tropes that we see in board games. And then you're going to be gathering these resources. At the end of each of these rounds, after you've placed all of your workers, there's a vote. And in that vote, you're going to be using these resources that you've been acquiring to vote for a color, and that color is the border around those tiles that I've already mentioned. So if you've got a bunch of ships sitting on tiles with a green border, you're going to want the green color, for lack of a better word, to win this vote. And you're going to be doing that by casting those green resources or possibly purple resources, which act as a wild, but also count as a double vote into whatever color you put it into. And then at the end of each round, you're going to count up those votes. The top two colors go onto a spot on the board. The board will actually tell you what the points are worth for each color that you have. It's called power. So again, in that instance where I have a bunch of ships on green, I'm going to count every ship that touches a tile that has one or more green rings. You can actually have tiles that have two colored rings or the same ring twice, etc. You're going to see how much power you have in that color, multiply it by the value that's printed on the board for whichever position that color scored, first or second, and that's how many points you're going to acquire. And that's kind of it. You're going to do that 3 times, and then you're going to do some endgame scoring again based on maybe those ambassador cards, maybe based on any action cards you're able to play. Those action cards can also be possibly used to swing the vote. And there are these edict cards I briefly mentioned. 4 of these are going to come out in each round of the game, and they're just going to stir the pot, add some craziness, if you will, to that voting system and to that power system. So there may be a card that comes out that says you put a cube on it of any color that you want. Let's say you put a green on it, and it says that you can now use that green as a wild for any other color. Or it may say that, okay, again, you put whatever color cube you want on that card when you play that edict card, and it'll say, if this color doesn't place in the top 2, then every vote you put into it simply gives you a point instead. And so that's going to sort of influence possibly how people might be voting on these colors. Now, I want to circle back real quick to a couple things. I talked about IV Studios doing a lot of negotiation games. Some of these resources that you get on the tile, they actually have a little white border around them. I don't know if I got a picture of it. And those resources you don't get, but you sort of put them in front of you, and then before your turn is over, you have to barter those away. You will not get to keep them. You're going to have to give them to another player, and you're going to negotiate what that trade might be with, of course, all the players around the table. This is not nearly as involved. It's not nearly as, I think, even game-breaking as it can be in Moonrakers. And a lot of the comments I've already seen about this game is that people are just very unimpressed with the reduction in sort of table talk and negotiation that this presents. You're not really negotiating on this vote. Someone tried to do that in this game. Well, I'll give you these resources if you are going to cast a couple of votes for blue. You could try that, I guess, but nothing that I know of, at least, is binding in those kind of negotiations. So it's really kind of a swing to see if that's going to work for you. One of the biggest problems I had with this game, now, first of all, again, I'm not a huge fan of negotiation. What I thought was kind of, it makes sense, but it was also annoying in that the resources that you're getting from these tiles do not correlate to the colors of them. So as you're getting these resources, you know that you're going to have to try and farm these things out, trade them out to get the resources that you actually need, if anyone ever gets those resources to trade away. So there's that aspect of it. The other thing, and I think one of the biggest complaints all of us around this table had, I'm going to show you a picture here. There's a card here on the table. It's the second card down. And if you look at it in this image, it's green. Now, if you look at this next image, there's that same card, and now it's yellow. That's because they printed a lot of these cards in foil. And as you were looking at this, especially in a convention type room with lights all over the place and sort of, these halogen lights that aren't the best environment for our eyes anyways, you could never be confident what you were looking at on some of these tiles or these cards, because even as you just moved around in your chair, the color of these things changed. And it was really, really frustrating. A lot of times we had to get up, hang on, can you show me that? Okay, yeah, no, now that's yellow. Also, the resources or the tiles, I should say, had yellow, orange, and red. And so even when they weren't foil, they were still a little difficult to tell apart. And on top of all of that, it just wasn't a really very interesting and compelling game, because I'm putting out ships to get things and then using those things to vote for things based on where my ships are sitting. And I'm going to do that 3 times with almost minimal difference from round to round. You can upgrade your ships. There's this sort of little upgrade track that's on part of your board. You can spend resources to upgrade your ship. The one is going to let you get extra resources, basically lets you double the resources that you gain when you place that ship. And then the second one's going to, or the other upgrade, there's only 2 upgrades you can ever build. The other one's going to increase the power of that ship. So again, it's going to act as if you have additional power in those colored rings on those tiles. And that's it. And not only that, but every other upgrade that you make on that track is a wasted upgrade. So your first one upgrades a ship. Your second one does nothing, just costs you resources. Your third one upgrades the next size ship. Fourth one does nothing. Fifth one upgrades the last ship. And then you can make a 6th upgrade, again, just spending a bunch of resources to get a bunch of endgame points, which seemed very, very difficult to do. One player did it. We're not exactly sure how, but one player pulled it off. Anyways, this is Brink. I won't go any further into this. Just not my kind of game because while I'm not a big fan of negotiation, I didn't really feel like there was enough negotiation here to be interesting. It does still do that thing that Moonrakers does where someone says, okay, who wants these? And all of a sudden everyone at the table just starts shouting or trying to, talk over each other. And that's just way too stressful of an environment for me. So a lot of those, either I tried to be prepared right ahead of time, threw out my trade and tried to just be done with it, or I just abstained, stayed out of it, don't want anything to do with it. That is Brink, and that was the end of the day. Tuesday, I'll go ahead and swing into Wednesday. One of the games that I played was Koi. Now, this game came out Gen Con of this year, I believe. I believe that was a release of it. I almost picked up a copy of it, as my daughter is a big fan of sort of Japanese culture and such, and always loves seeing koi ponds when we go to sushi restaurants or whatever. This is the same company. I don't know if it's the same designer, but the same company that produced Bonsai. It also came out at Gen Con 2 years ago, and these are very, very similar games. The main thing you're trying to do is you're trying to build a koi pond. You've got a number of these relatively small hexagonal tiles, just cardboard tiles that you're putting out that basically makes your little pond. And then you can, in some instances, put a stone frame around the edges. You can possibly put a lantern on that frame. You're going to be also acquiring the koi fish themselves, which are these really nicely illustrated clear acrylic tiles with the fish printed on them from a top-down view. So it very much is, recreates that scene of looking down into a koi pond. You're doing this, you're gaining a lot of these things by drafting cards from a central board in the middle of the table. Cards will slide from right to left as they come out of the deck. The cards that are most recent on that board may have a cost associated with them, but cards that have sat out there longer will actually maybe give you some money. They may give you additional resources. They may actually give you the tiles that then you're able to place into your koi pond, except for you can't just immediately place them. Tiles get stored on a board you have in front of you called the Sensei tile or the Sensei board. That board is going to have a couple of actions on it. And then some of those cards that you're going to be acquiring from that board, that main board, are going to act as workers. They're going to actually line up next to your Sensei board. And when you decide, instead of drafting cards on your turn, if you decide to work, you're going to trigger that Sensei board, take one of the actions on it, and also activate all of your workers in any order that you wish. You can do all of this in any order that you want. And they may be letting you acquire tiles, put tiles into your koi pond, and trigger other things as you go. I think that's kind of a good enough way of explaining the game. The problem that I had with Bonsai, and I saw the same problem here in Koi, is that there's a large variety of different cards that you're drafting from this deck. Some of them are going to just give you things, so maybe immediate benefits. So you might, again, just grab some tiles, maybe grab some money. Some of them are going to give you these workers, as I mentioned. They're going to have more lasting effects in your tableau. Some of them are going to give you endgame scoring, and there may even be a fourth one that I can't recall off the top of my head. And so as you're sitting there and you're looking at all these cards coming across, you're going, oh, I want to grab that because that's going to help me with the work. Oh, I want to go ahead and grab that. It's going to start giving me some oh, I want to go ahead and grab that. That's going to help me with scoring. I want to grab all these cards. That deck, though, is the timer. And so you quickly realize, well, maybe not quickly enough, that I've got all these cards in front of me and I have no koi pond. I haven't built anything. And so then you kind of start to make this shift. Oh, geez, I need to start getting all this stuff built. I need to start getting these fish. but you still kind of keep getting distracted by these cards, especially because there are a couple of bonus actions or cards that come out. In our case, we had one very large koi fish. We had a special waterfall tile that you could add to your koi pond, and you would be able to gain these when you triggered certain things. One of them was triggered by having a certain number of cards. Another one was triggered by having a certain size of koi pond already. And so even the game is incentivizing you to grab more of those cards. And like I said, you're just running out the clock. And so what I found with Bonsai and with Koi is that all of a sudden you're looking at the deck, there's not a lot of cards left. You realize that unless everyone's going to start just taking work actions, the game's going to end and you have done very little in front of you. I think that there is a lot of potential out of both of these games to make these beautiful scenes in front of you, either, beautiful little bonsai trees or beautiful little koi ponds. But the game is not really going to last long enough to let you put any of that into play. I almost kind of wish there was a more streamlined version of this where there weren't so many cards to fight over. If I could just draft some components and try and build a nice, beautiful, decorative koi pond or bonsai tree. I know I keep kind of mixing these two together. I think that would be far more interesting than this sort of race, this kind of challenge against my opponents to try and build a big work action or to try and trigger some of these bonuses just based on having certain cards. I feel like it's actually that deck of cards that gets in the way of making these games fun and being able to have this beautiful scene in front of you that the game depicts on the box, in the rule book, all that. You're not often going to see it come together like you think that it will. And it's kind of disappointing. So that is Koi by DV Games. The last game I've got for Wednesday, this is another very, very hot popular game. I believe this also came out at Gen Con this year. This is 12 Rivers. I did not write down the publisher or designer of this one. 12 Rivers is actually a very, very simple order fulfillment game with this significant gimmick of little plastic marbles that are rolling down this foam-backed angled board. So on each of these rounds of the game, and I don't remember if it's actually limited based on number of rounds. I believe it is. I think there's only a certain number of rounds you're going to play, but you're going to put a bunch of these just plastic little marbles at the top of this track. There's a little cardboard gate that goes into place that holds those marbles in place so you can see what's out there. And then you're going to have a number of these wooden tiles in your player color. And they're going to be arranged on this track on the bottom corner of this main board. And in the order that your tiles appear on that track, you'll take that tile and place it somewhere out on this board. You'll see in these images there are a bunch of all these little notches. You'll see some of these already slotted in the place of these notches, and they kind of act as gates. So you're going to put these tokens out there to stop the marbles as they come down this track. There is a pond in the bottom of this where they kind of collect. There's something of a theme here in that these are magical orbs that the townsfolk of your local village are using for special things, and you simply have to collect them and help them fulfill their needs. And so these will flow down this river and collect in this pond. One person can go to that pond and collect any marbles that are left there at the end of each round. There's also a couple slats at the bottom of the board where you can put your tokens to actually draft more of these townsfolk cards to give you, more orders to fulfill. There's also a deck of these sort of an action card. I'm not sure exactly what they're called in the game, but these have two effects. You can play a pair of them to trigger their effect, and those effects may be putting one of those action tiles, one of your blocker tiles out there, a gate tile, at no cost. Maybe acquiring another villager for no cost. Maybe, being able to, again, just kind of break a rule in some aspect of the game. But those cards are also used as a cost to put your gate tiles out there on the board. So, for example, if you want to put your gate as close to the marble as you can to guarantee that you're going to get that one marble, you can do that, but it's going to cost you 3 of these unique action cards. So you're going to have a hand of maybe I think it was 6 of them at the beginning of the game. So you're sort of getting rid of those awfully quick. As you come further down that river, the cost of those get a little cheaper until you actually get down towards the bottom, and then you start to cost again, which I thought was really, really weird. I think the idea being that as all these marbles start to kind of funnel down to the bottom, you suddenly get to pick anything you want. But of course, it's already been picked somewhat clean by the players who are further up that path. So that was a little odd. As you're getting these marbles, they get placed onto this little camel tile that you have. It can only hold 6 marbles. You can't take marbles off of that camel unless you have an order to place them on. And so there was this kind of weird challenge in that. Well, again, maybe I have an order that I can't fulfill, but I got some other marbles because I think, well, hey, I can start working on this next order, but I didn't get it. And so I don't know. It was a little strange in that aspect. I did like some of these cards that let you break the rules, but then it was so difficult to get the marbles that you want unless you spent these cards. Again, it's kind of like the game gives you this thing, but you really can't use it. You can only choose what you're going to use it for. And that was, it's kind of a little, I don't want to say frustrating, but it was like, how do I decide what's really going to help me in the long run? And all of this, of course, is, yes, it's a very lavishly produced game. It's a very pretty looking game, but it wasn't a very interesting game. It was the game itself was just get these things and fulfill these orders with this little gimmick of these marbles rolling down this path, which never looked as interesting. It never played out as exciting as you expected it to be. They're just little plastic beads almost. So I think even if they made them out of glass, it would have made the sound and the movement of them a little more interesting to watch. But most of the time you'd pull out that gate, the marbles would fall an inch and then stop against all these gates. And so I don't know. I had thought about picking this up at Gen Con. I'm quite glad I didn't, because I could see this being a one-time play. Okay, I see what it does. It's cute. It's nice. And then I'm done with it. That was 12 Rivers. That was the end of Thursday. Sorry, the end of Wednesday. Thursday had a really big start. Thursday morning, I mentioned in a previous episode, I started off with Evanfall, and as I was playing that, I was aware that a table next to me with one of my good friends sitting at, actually two of my good friends sitting at it, was playing Luthier by Paverson Games. And we got done with Evanfall. I went and got some food. I came back. They were still playing. I kind of putzed around the room for a half hour, and they were still playing, but finally starting to wrap up. And I was able to jump right in at that table and then play Luthier. This is a massive, massive game. I was quite surprised at the complexity of this. I was quite surprised at just how much it does versus Distilled, the previous and sort of initial title from Paverson Games. This is a game in which you are an instrument maker. For example, I played the character of Stradivari, a famous instrument maker from many, many years ago. I don't know actually the years of his life, but a iconic instrument maker of his era. And you're going to be playing workers out onto this large, massive board and triggering various actions at these locations. Now, real quick, it's a worker placement game, and there are 5 areas that you're going to play workers. Your workers are simply represented by little colored discs, very nicely painted decorative discs with numbers 1 through 5. You start with 1, 3, and 5. You're going to get 2 and 4 throughout the game. You also have up to 3 apprentices that don't have any numbers on them. They just kind of have your player crest on them. When you're placing a worker out, you can place it by itself or with any number of these apprentices that you may have unlocked or acquired from the market throughout the game. And in the first phase of each round, I believe it's a 6-round game. You're going to take turns going around the board and putting out a stack of workers. Okay, here's my 1 and maybe 2 apprentices. People don't know what the numbers are, by the way. You place them number side down. You're going to keep going around until you've played all of your workers and maybe all of your apprentices. Then, in that same turn order, a player is going to choose one of these 5 areas of the board to activate as long as they have one of their workers in that space. And what that means is that you may have thought, okay, I'm going to come over here to get some money. I'm going to then come and activate the market, which is kind of a free action that you can take on your, not a free action, but it is, you activate the market instead of taking a normal turn and only you would activate the market. So you may spend your entire turn saying, hey, I'm just going to go to the market, do this thing, and then I'm done, and play continues. So you may have thought, I'm going to come here and get money, then I'm going to go to the market, then I'm going to come over here and do this action. Well, if the player who goes first chooses that location, that sort of turns everything that you were planning on doing on its head, because now all of a sudden you may not have the money or the resources or whatever that you were hoping to have when that spot got triggered, and you may find yourself just completely wasting the action. And in that sense, it was kind of a little bit like Carnegie, which kind of had that same idea that, okay, I really want to take this action, but I'm not going to actually get to pick the action that we take until 2 or 3 more turns, and someone may pick something out of sequence that I have in mind, and then I'm kind of up a creek without a paddle. We didn't run into a lot of that, though. I will say that in most instances, I think people were all in pretty similar boats in that, yeah, I need to go and get my money. Yeah, I need to go to the market before I can start triggering any of these actions. And so we didn't really run into that a whole bunch. Now, to kind of quickly summarize some of these actions, you may go to a spot to perform a song. You may go to a spot to pick up a customer, essentially. There was a term for them. I can't remember what it was. But these cards sit on your personal player board, and they're going to tell you what that, either a composer, a performer, or there was another title. I can't remember what it could have been. But they may want a particular instrument. For example, I had Haydn. Beethoven was one of the cards as well. And so you were trying to fulfill their needs. And they may want you to perform a song. They may want you to repair an instrument. That was another area of the board. Or they may want you to make them an instrument. Now, the one thing I thought was kind of weird with all this, and I can't run through every possible action in this game, but when you were building an instrument, you would take the instrument from a sort of a market of cards, and the instrument went next to your player board either immediately or on a later round, and I won't get into that. Then you had to take an action on your player board to rough in that instrument, spending materials, which was metal or wood or animal parts. And I won't go into that, except for to say that, for example, the hair of a stringed instrument bow is actually made out of horsehair, and for what it's worth, harvesting the horsehair does not harm the horse. But there were some other things made out of animals back in the old days that did quite harm the animal. Anyways, you would use those resources to rough in the instrument. You then had to take another action on your player board to finalize the instrument, spending more resources, maybe not quite as many as the first action, and that would then make the instrument complete. You would tuck it behind the appropriate customer if you had one, and that would start to satisfy the requirements of these customers. The customers had timers, by the way, so as they sat out there, they would actually give you little benefits, but if they waited too long for you to fulfill any of their needs, they would leave, and you'd actually lose some points. Everything else that was in the game, though, the performance cards, the repair an instrument card, you had to be ready when you triggered that action. They did not go to your board. You didn't have time to work on them. You kind of had to do everything at that moment. And so, again, that was one of those instances where, hey, I want to go and repair this instrument, but I got to be ready to repair it when I take that action, which means I need to have the resources ahead of time. And if someone chooses your actions out of order, sort of forces you to do things in an order you hadn't planned, then you just can't do anything. Not to say that that was necessarily a bad thing, just something to consider if you're looking at this game. In general, I did like Luthier. I did think that there is this sort of aspect where you can specialize one of your workers as you go up these 3 independent tracks on certain different spots of the board. You can then gain a card. You put one of your worker tokens on that card. You take a different token from your player components that sort of says, hey, this is the token that represents my upgraded worker. And then anytime that you use that, you got to reference again, okay, what's the value of this guy? Oh, I put my 4 on that card. So this token now represents the 4. And some of those powers were, man, they were pretty potent. I had one that let me ignore a level of a game goal. So there's these goals that sit out, they get placed at setup, and it may have said repair 3 instruments or repair, or have some number of instruments built, et cetera, et cetera. And I could just ignore one of those requirements. So I could basically score the next level up. My friend Colin, who I played with, he actually had a ability that let him make any instrument and ignore the requirement of one of his customers. So the customer may have said they wanted a woodwind instrument. He gave them a snare drum and said, "You're going to be happy with this." And they would say, "Okay, yeah, sure, fine, sounds great." And I thought that was a little frustrating because, it was kind of like, you could just grab the easiest to build instrument if you kind of had a bunch of one particular resource. So I'm going to build this really simple, cheap little drum, and I'm going to fulfill the requirement of this guy who otherwise would have been much more harder to get done. Of course, I was able to ignore or at least score up. I still had to have something done to accomplish these goals, but I could grab a couple extra points. I'm not sure that those were equal, and I didn't get to see every card that was in the game. And so I'm not quite sure on sort of the balance of those cards, but it's too hard to say quite yet. The other thing I thought was a little odd was that, again, I have a composer, or maybe I have someone who wants an instrument, but he also wants me to perform a song from a different era. And so there were some spots in there where the theme didn't quite click for me. Again, I make an instrument for this customer, but then that instrument itself kind of goes onto the board, and the first person onto the board in this orchestra section of that board becomes the principal chair. And I'm like, and you're incentivized, of course, to be the principal chair, which is actually a little area control mini game of each instrument that goes into an orchestra. But I'm an instrument maker. Stradivari never cared about necessarily the talent of his customers. He cared about selling these instruments. And so this, again, it was this sort of weird, took sort of a bunch of ideas of music and threw them into this game in ways that don't necessarily jive with each other. But I still felt some of that. I appreciated the different aspects of the musical genre, the sort of classical, baroque, romantic music, and just the theming of this game, that these real life people who were included in here, these real instruments that were included in here. I myself was a cellist ever since I was the age of 8. One of the very first cards I drafted during the setup was a cello card, and Stradivari made cellos. His cellos are worth millions of dollars today. I happen to know that Yo-Yo Ma has a Stradivarius cello, and so just having that pair of cards from the very get-go of this game just brought a huge smile to my face. I can tell you that my copy of Luthier is due to deliver today, the moment that I'm filming this, and I was really kind of torn as to whether or not I would even open it. I actually wanted to play this at the retreat because I really didn't care for Distilled that much. And you can see a review I did out on the Dice Tower some time ago that kind of explains why. But I was afraid that there would be some of the same misses, and there kind of are, but they're not as frustrating or even to me game-breaking as they are in Distilled. I've decided that I am going to go ahead and open my copy of Luthier. I will at least hold on to it for some time. Again, this is something that it's a theme that harkens back to my very, very young years as a child, something that was very, very important to me. I still have my cello. I still have my old trumpet. I have a number of instruments kind of scattered all about the house here, and music's just kind of always been a part of my life. Anyways, that is Luthier from Paverson Games. The last game I'll mention as Thursday was, so this was after, if you saw the previous episode, this was after we played Fluff and Arbos at Full. The last game that we played was Rhymes with Duck. This is a very, very simple game where you're going to have sort of an active player each round. They flip over the card of a deck. It gives them just kind of a random word like sinker or sail. And you've got to then, all of you are coming up with a word that rhymes with this word. You then reveal your card simultaneously. And there is a very convoluted scoring system as to, if you are the active player, you only want to match with, I think, one other player. You don't want to match with everyone else, but if all the other players match with themselves and they score a bunch of extra points, the scoring system on this never made any sense to me. A lot of the words that it gave you were somewhat understandably very hard to rhyme with. Some of them, of course, could eke out some, inappropriate words, which to us was funny, but the game itself really just was not fun. In fact, even Colin, who suggested that we play this, admitted afterwards that it wasn't nearly what he expected, especially with a title of Rhymes with Duck. Anyways, that was the end of Thursday. I played a ton of games on Friday. Let me tell you about them. On Friday, I started off with one of Board and Dice's newest T games. This is Thebai. At least I believe that's how you pronounced it. I kept calling it Thebai because I felt like maybe it was a online Grecian secondhand website to sell your old sandals, right? Thebai. Anyways, this is from David Turtsey. I think there may be one other designer who has credit on this. And like I said, it's one of the newest T games from Board and Dice. Now, I'm not a huge Board and Dice fan. I'm not a huge David Turtsey fan, and I'm not a big fan of a lot of these T games, but this is sort of set in that Roman era, and I do like that theme, so I did want to check this out, and I was very happy that Kyle Courtwright, one of the recurring visitor of the Dice Tower Retreat and other events, I don't have a picture of him, but he's a phenomenal teacher, and so I'm always happy to sit down at a table with Kyle, and he taught this as best he could. He was basically learning it about the same time that we were. This is a combination of a tile placement, worker movement type of game. And I know that's already throwing a lot of systems out there, but to try and summarize this quickly, you've got a player board in front of you with these sort of building tiles, a unique shape of tile. You're going to be possibly playing those out onto the main board, which kind of represents the main city, I'm assuming, of Thebai. And you're then going to have a number of dice. The dice never get rolled. They simply represent two different types of characters. You've got civilians and you've got the hoplites or warriors. And each of them has, of course, a six-sided die. And the values on those dice are a 1, a 2, and a 3. And then those same numbers but with a star. So you have a 1 star, a 2 star, and a 3 star. A 1 star, for example, is no better than a 1. But you're going to have to level those dice all the way up for certain purposes. Your civilians are going to get placed out on that board to trigger the actions of one of their adjacent buildings. They kind of go in between the edges of these tiles. You can pay a coin to take both of those actions. After you do that, you can move an Archon character. This is a wooden little meeple character that you have, and they sit on top of these buildings, and they're going to move from building to building in a weird way in that they want to jump over other dice, whether it is a warrior, a hoplite, or one of these citizens. But if they jump over a die of your own, they decrease its value. So a 1 star would go down to a 1. But if you jump over a die belonging to one of your opponents, it increases their value. So a 2 star would become a 3. You can jump over just one gap where there is no die. You have to pay a coin to do that, and that's all that you can do. So you want to try and have a bunch of these workers out there so you can kind of leapfrog from building to building. And then they'll take the action that they land on. The final spot they land on, they'll take that action. All of these actions, and there's a bunch of them, I of course couldn't even begin to cover them all, but they're going to do things like let you put out more die, let you increase or decrease the value of these dice, let you put out more tiles. There are 2 tracks on the side of the main board that you can climb up, and they are going to give you a lot of those same actions. They may give you resources. They may give you contracts. Contracts are going to cost resources to complete. You can only complete one contract on a turn. And again, you're going to get those benefits from that. So you may be trying to move around to get the resources to fulfill a contract. You might be trying to, increase the values of these dice. The hoplites are going to go out in the same way. They sit between the different tiles. They don't trigger any actions on those tiles. But you're going to play this game for 10 rounds. And at the beginning of the game, you're going to know, and I'm assuming this is for every game, 2 of the rows of this main board that you're going to get attacked from. There's going to be an invading army, if they have a name, I don't know who they are, and they're going to activate one of the, I believe, 6 or 7 rows of this main board. And you're going to know 2 of those rows at the very, very beginning of the game, which means you can right away start moving your hoplites out into that row of the board. When that attack happens, you're going to have an attack strength of your enemy, and every player has to have, or should have, a equal or higher defensive value of their hoplites than that invading army. And again, the stars don't matter here. So if they're attacking with a 2 and I have a 2 star, I've met the attack. I have not exceeded it. If you don't meet that threshold, you lose points due to the, equal to the difference. If you meet the attack, nothing happens. If you exceed the attack, you're going to get some points equal to the difference. And then whoever has the highest defensive value in that row is going to get a little benefit, which could be used to maybe fulfill contracts for free or do other things towards the end of the game. And all that was kind of fine. The one thing that was a little weird about it was that once your dice are out there, they don't move. They only pip up or pip down or literally go away. When citizens would get upgraded beyond a 3-star, they go to a monument board on the side of the table, and that's going to let you then possibly get some endgame scoring. When your hoplites pip up, they can become a stronger warrior, but the warrior sits at the same row of that hoplite, and again is going to unlock possibly a special benefit for you. But if the attack has already happened in that row, then putting out that stronger warrior does not do you any good. Because in fact, even that die that upgraded beyond the 3-star, it doesn't come back to you. You cannot relocate these dice. So for example, when an attack happens, if you have a hoplite out there, you have to pay a gold to keep him out there. If you don't, he essentially dies off. The die does come back to you, but it resets to a 1. You can redeploy it into another row, but then you have to start building it up from scratch again. And so it was a little odd that, okay, I'm in this big city. We just got attacked on the second western gate. Okay, now everyone moved to this. Oh no, you can't move. They just stay there. And that was a little weird. And that's really kind of been my experience with a lot of these T games. They're just puzzles. They're mechanisms. As everyone says, you're pulling levers and pushing buttons. You're moving things around. You're trying to get points. But the theme is really kind of art deep. You don't necessarily actually feel like you're doing this. Now, I did like the idea of, okay, I know this attack is coming. Of course, knowing exactly when and where is a little, again, non-thematic. But having that advanced knowledge and being able to try and look for the efficient turns that give me the resources to fulfill these orders, maybe give me the resources to take better actions, to be able to put extra dice out and pip them up. Trying to get as much done out of every single turn was fun. I did enjoy that. But at the end of the day, at the end of the game, I thought that I really feel like I defended this city. No, I just got a bunch of dice out and I tried to get a lot of points and I didn't quite get there. I had an okay game of this. Again, like the way that it looked, the puzzle of it was kind of nice, but not something I think I need to add to my collection. Thebai by Board and Dice. Up next, I ran into my good buddy Omar Hernandez. I mentioned him in the previous episode. We played a quick game of Fliptoons. This is from Thunderworks Games. I don't know the name of the designer. And this is a very simple, I believe, a 1 to 4 player game where you are trying to sort of build a cartoon. You're trying to improve a cartoon. You start with 6 cards. Everyone has the same 6 cards. You're going to play them in 2 rows of 3 cards. Each of those cards is going to give you a point value. Some of them may just give you a point value. Some of them may say, well, you're going to get points based on a certain criteria. So one of the very, very first starting cards you have says you're going to get a point from that card for every unique card orthogonally adjacent to it. So if that card goes in one of the top, one of the corners, you can only maybe get 2 points from it. If it goes in the top or bottom middle space, you can get up to 3 points from it. It's just completely random as to where that card goes after you've shuffled your little deck and placed out your cards. There's a market of cards on the side. You can buy them. They're arranged in terms of there's sort of there's a point value on each card, but then there's also a sort of a strength value on each card. You're going to organize them from lowest to highest strength, and they're going to have a cost that's assigned from the market itself. So you can buy up to 2 cards on your turn. You can shed up to 2 cards from your tableau in front of you per turn. You get 2 actions. So you can either buy and sell, or sell and sell, buy and buy, whatever. And after you've done that, all the cards that you have are going to get reshuffled and played out again in front of you. So if you have more than 6 cards, you're still only ever going to have 6 cards in front of you, and you're going to constantly reshuffle after each round. So it's not even to say you just keep drawing cards from your deck until you run out. No, you recycle at the end of each round. And if you have less than 6 cards, you simply will not get to fill out your entire tableau. Every round of the game is going to play like this, just back and forth over and over and over again. Each round, you're going to sort of tabulate your score of all the cards you have in front of you. And the first person to hit 30 points of cards will trigger the end of the game. They get a little card that gives them an extra 3-point bonus. And then you play one more round, and whoever has the highest score of that round wins the game. There's no other scoring. That's basically it. These cards it was an interesting idea. A lot of these cards would say, again, they're going to give you points based on certain criteria. And some of them are just completely random based on how those cards shuffle and come out in front of you. Now, I bought a couple of cards. They were camels, and it said that they would give me 2 points, plus an extra 2 points if I had more camels than any other player or the market. So I bought every single camel I came across. I had a lion card that said it would give me a certain number of points plus an additional value of points if all the cards around it were lower in strength, not points, but in strength, than the lion itself. So I simply made sure I didn't buy any cards of a higher value. So you could mitigate some of that luck. Omar had a couple of cards that said, well, if it goes in your top row, then it slides up, you get to play another card under it. But he also had a card that said it was going to force you to get rid of, to literally lose any card on its left. And so he would play these cards out. That card would go in the middle. He'd have to get rid of the card on its left. And so you could play this a little more dangerously if you wanted to, possibly getting some higher score out of the cards. I never really played enough with those, so I don't know if there was ample risk versus reward in those cards. As we were playing it, I liked it. I liked this idea of, it wasn't just deck building, it was literally deck crafting, because you had to try and get cards in, get cards out. Okay, this card was useful early on. Now I want it out of here. I've acquired higher values. I don't want the cheaper cards. You really want to try and get down to a really strong 6-card deck. At the very end of the game, I didn't like it because, again, it is just completely down to this randomness of the shuffle. And I had actually, in most of these rounds, I had just 1 point or more than Omar. I triggered the 30-point end game. I got my 3 bonus points. And in that last round, he got a higher score than he had ever gotten in the entire game. And I was like, how did that even happen? And again, it's just the randomness of the shuffle. A lot of the comments online are kind of saying the same thing, that it's just a completely random game. You really have minimal control. Yes, you can try and craft a deck, but it's almost a bit like Quacks of Quedlinburg. Who knows how it's going to work out for you? And I think that even that aspect, I had thought about getting this game as we were playing it, because I could see my wife and I, it has a very, very small footprint, so I could see my wife and I playing it at, the pub or a speakeasy that we go to in the evenings, but I think she would hate it for just that same reason. So anyways, that was Fliptoons. The next game I played was Kelp, Shark versus Octopus. I know this was a Kickstarter game. I don't remember if it was self-published or not. I didn't write down a designer on this. This game made quite a splash. Sorry, yes, I made that pun. Because when it was in the Kickstarter phase, a couple of folks managed to basically steal the game. They stole the design, and they were releasing bootleg copies of it for sale before the crowdfunding even completed. And so that was kind of a big deal back when that happened. This is a 2-player only game. It is an asymmetrical game. It reminds me very, very much of So You've Been Eaten. And this is a game where one player is going to play the shark, the other is going to play the octopus, and both of them have very, very different games. The shark is trying to eat the octopus, and it will be moving around these specific little water spots on this board. I think they have a grand total of maybe 9 spaces they can go to. I'm not even sure if it's that many. I believe, actually, it's probably one. I'm not going to try and count it, but they have a number of spaces they can go to. They have a bag of dice that they're possibly able to add to throughout the game. They're also going to be losing some of these dice throughout the game, and those dice are going to let them move, hunt, or attack. Blue, yellow, and red. They've got a track on their board of these little tokens, and as they're playing some of these dice, they might come down and sit on this track. When the tokens of this track fill up, they flip over and give the shark a new power. There's also a row of cards in the bottom of the board, and other dice in certain ways will go to a separate track, and the player can then spend those dice to buy these cards, but one of those dice will go onto another track on the board, which basically represents the shark's fatigue. And when that track fills up, the shark dies and loses the game. It basically starves to death. So they've got a couple of things to manage, but all of it is at the hand of drawing these dice, rolling them. You only get 2 dice. You can possibly get a third if you completely fill out that first track I mentioned. And there may be cards that come out that let you get more. I didn't see any. The cards that you buy will let you add dice into your bag, and it'll tell you which colors to add. And that's more or less what the shark is doing. Now, if the shark manages to figure out where the octopus is, and I'll cover how to do that in a second, and they have an attack die ready, they can use the attack die to attack the octopus, and when that happens, each player has 3 cards, a red one, a yellow, and a blue one, same color of the dice, and they will choose one of these cards in secret and reveal them at the same time, and if you have both played the same color, then the shark basically outsmarted the octopus. eats it, game is immediately over. But if they are different cards, then the octopus's card will trigger and it will let the octopus get away from the shark. However, that card from the octopus then gets discarded, as does the matching colored card, not the one that you played, but the matching colored card from the shark, dwindling the options of the octopus to be able to get away. And eventually you're going to get down to, if the shark finds the octopus again, it's gone, if it has managed to evade the previous 2 attacks. Okay, the octopus. The octopus has a bunch of these little plastic, very cute, little almost Azul-like tokens in front of them. They are screen printed on one side. Only the octopus player can see them. And they're going to just represent some shells, which are going to be used to pay costs. One of them will actually have the octopus printed on them. There's a couple of traps. So one of them starts off in play. And then there are some food tokens which do not start in play. The octopus is going to have a deck of cards sort of organized by like a skill level. They're going to start off with their lowest skill cards. They can play up to 2 cards on their turn. And those cards are going to have costs, which usually is paid by revealing these tokens on the board. So I played this with my friend Colin. He would lay down a token showing me what it was, and that would let him buy new cards. It would also let him then start swapping out these tokens, taking some of these food pieces. He could then play a card to be able to eat that food piece. I believe if he was next to it, I don't quite recall. I don't really know exactly everything he was able to do with those cards. But eventually, as he's trying to play more and more of these cards, he's revealing more and more of these tokens. Now, sometimes he can stand them back up. Sometimes he can even reorganize them. He even had a method where he could take a couple of them, including his octopus, put them into a bag, shake them, pull them out one at a time. And then I, for some weird reason, as the shark player, could tell him where to put those tiles, even though I didn't know what they were. I could try and do that maybe if I was close to an open spot and I wanted to try and search it, as soon as I could. All the octopus has to do is eat its 4 pieces of food, get these 4 tiles onto the board and eat them. And if it does that before the shark eats it, then the octopus wins. And that's really it. Or, of course, if the shark dies, then the octopus can just kind of wait out the timer and win that way. This reminded me a lot of So You've Been Eaten because, first of all, both games have very, very asymmetrical player abilities. You're playing 2 entirely different games where one player is trying to interact with the other. However, a lot like So You've Been Eaten, I felt that one of those players has a very, very boring game to play. And I won't cover So You've Been Eaten, but as the shark player, my entire turn was pulling out 2 dice, rolling them, hoping that I get some decent values that let me do something, hoping that I get decent dice that let me do something. You have an overwhelming majority of movement dice. And so basically you're just circling around this board, just kind of waiting. If I only drew 2 movement dice, I could play them on the board, or I could choose to not play them and kind of let them go onto this track that then let me buy these cards. But then, like I said, I would lose some of those dice and just, basically tire out my own shark. If I put them on the board and then I could move across them, they would come to that upper track and let me sort of advance my skills. And so what you were really supposed to do as a shark, and I didn't realize this until later on in the game, is I was supposed to just move around, move over those dice, the movement dice. They come down that track. They help me increase my level. I needed to kind of wait and not do a lot of searching, not try to do any attacking, because those dice just go down and are basically on their way to being trashed to buy these cards. And so what that kind of means, again, is that the shark, your first several turns, all you really want to do is just move around. That's it. And then after you've done all that movement, maybe if you're lucky, you have an idea of where the octopus is, and maybe you're where that section is, and maybe you have a high enough attack die that you can go after it. And if you don't, it takes anywhere from a 2 to a 5 to be able to attack the octopus. If you rolled a 1 with that attack die, you can't use it. And if you can't use it, it goes in the bottom corner of your board where it has to sit there and go towards buying these cards when you really want it back in the bag so you can try and make an attack. And it just, I felt like as the shark, I was really so much at the mercy of these dice. I had so little agency of my own, and you were really supposed to play the game a certain way. And I didn't do that because I didn't know that. And so I actually started to wear my shark out pretty quick. And I was like, oh man, I got to stop doing this. There's no way I'm going to finish this game. Now, as it was, I did buy a card that immediately eliminated one of those 3 rock, paper, scissors cards. I also did have a card that basically said I could spend it at any point to turn an attack die into a 6 and immediately make an attack. Colin, as I kind of did start to wait him out, he revealed his Octopus. He did stand it back up, but I knew where it was. He did not get to move it. I got into position. I pulled a red die out. I rolled a 5. I made the attack. The 2 cards that I had available to me was, either he was going to try and push me to an outer edge, so it'd kind of be harder for me to get back, or he was going to try and evade, where he would take the 2 tiles and shuffle them. And I could tell that he was really enjoying that play of shuffling his tiles. Okay, where do you want me to put this one? Where do you want me to put that one? And I just had a hunch that's what he was going to pick. He did. I played the counter card and immediately won the game. And it was interesting because I felt like it was so anticlimactic until, boom, that very moment. And I immediately just won the game. And it was like, okay, well, that was thrilling for a second, which was kind of funny because if you've ever watched a nature documentary on the ocean and animals hunting animals, that's actually kind of how it goes. Fish is swimming along, predator just jumps at it, boom, eats it. That's it. That's the end of the scene, right? And so it was weird because it felt boring and yet thematic kind of at the same time. I wanted to play this because my daughter is a huge fan of marine biology. She loves sharks. I was sending her all kinds of pictures of this shark component while I was playing it. But I can't see us having fun with this at all. I think that we would be arguing over who gets to be the octopus. Now, of course, my daughter would want to be the shark, but I think she would find it a very boring character to play. I felt like the octopus had an interesting game to play, but as my buddy Colin put it, you could be dead at any moment. You just really have no idea. That was Kelp, Shark versus Octopus. Next game was Mind Management. This is, I don't know what year this came out, but it's been out for a little while now. This is a one versus many hidden movement game, and it's themed on a comic book series or maybe a graphic novel series that I admittedly do not know. But it's got this very weird sort of psychological, almost maybe, what's the word I'm looking for? Where it's kind of like, it's quasi not realistic, right? It's kind of this almost like a superpower. I don't know. It was very, very weird to get through the rulebook. The rulebook was not well organized. This is a very difficult game. Colin actually taught this to myself, Wendy Yee, and another player. It's supposed to be basically a 4 versus 1. They had to kind of add in a extra character, and they sort of all work together to control that 4th character on their side. I wanted to be the agent, the person who is moving around this board secretly. And I'm not going to get very, very deep into this because, as you'll see, we got deeper into it than I really needed to because the whole idea for me, the agent, was that I had to move around this board. I had to visit these various symbols. I had a couple of cards in front of me that told me what symbols I needed to go and seek out. And if I sought them out and got to a space that had one or more of them, I got a little token and I would put it on the board so that my opponents knew that I had managed to get to one of those symbols. They didn't know what they were. They just knew that I had managed to score something. And if I got 12 of those tokens out, I won the game. Or if they could not capture me before a certain number of rounds went by, again, I could just wait out the clock and win the game. There are tons of these symbols all over this board. It's a very simple square-based board. Most players get to move orthogonally. I got to make 1 movement. Each of them got to make 2 movements. And each one of them, there were, again, 4 characters that they were controlling. 2 of them got to activate every turn. I, of course, only activated once. But I did have these other agents. I cannot remember what they were called. They were kind of represented by these kind of creepy, like hockey mask or skull symbols. But wherever I had those agents on the board, the symbols that they were covering then became symbols that my opponents couldn't ask me about. And that was a major element of the game because on their turn, they would move their character and then they would make a action. That action would often involve asking me a question about any one of these symbols that they had access to. So they could ask me, have you seen any palm trees? Well, maybe I hadn't a couple movements ago. And so I'd say, okay, yeah. And I should mention that at the beginning of the game, I make 4 movements right away before anyone else even gets on the board. And then I take the first turn. So I actually had 5 movements in before any other player would activate. And so they could ask me a symbol. I'm, well, yeah, okay, yeah, I was here at some point during this game. Well, I've only taken 5 actions. I can't get that far away, and it's 4 versus 1. And so we got in the first game. Like I said, it was very difficult to learn. I made my first couple of wins. I did not really understand the purpose of these agents that I had. And within 2 rounds, they found me and captured me. Okay, well, that was kind of a letdown. Colin said, "Well, hey, you need to understand what these guys do. They protect you. We can't ask you about the things that they cover, except for that one player had the ability to just move them." I was like, okay, all right, got it. So let's just play again. Let's just reset. I'll draw some new cards, kind of start over again, and we'll play again. I got 3 rounds in, and they caught me again, and it was very, 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 very frustrating to me. As I'm sitting there and I'm trying to keep my best poker face, and I was told I did a pretty good job. I think that's actually a benefit to having ADD, is I can just kind of like stare off in the corner, and I'm not even paying attention to them. I'm thinking about something else. And so I'm not making any faces about the things that they're saying. But listening to them, well, okay, he's hiding these things, so he doesn't want us to know about them. They've already been able to ask me questions. And again, it's this idea that it's a hidden movement game, but you can ask me questions. Well, how can you ask me questions? You don't know where I am. How are you just like Marco Polo and I have to respond? Like, it was, that bit of it was really kind of weird, because I'm supposed to be divulging, and I have to tell the truth. I have to divulge information right from the very get-go. I'm only a couple of turns ahead of you, and you get to move twice as much as I do. How the heck can I win this game? And so listening to this, they're starting, okay, well, he's hiding these things, so we probably know this is where he wants. Well, he was here and he was here already, and he's only a couple turns ahead of us, so maybe he's over here. Well, no, he's hiding that symbol. Oh, I bet you that means he's there. Okay, well, then you come over here and you move his agent, and then we can ask him on this thing, and then the other player can run over here and capture me. So I went from them having no idea where I was in 1 turn to honing in on the 2nd turn to capturing me in the 3rd. Now, admittedly, I'd say that was a 50% improvement on my part. But still, I found this to be absolutely impossible to play successfully against other players. Now, this thing does have a system, I can't remember what it's called, and we didn't get into any of this, in that as you're playing with the same groups of people, presumably, and of course you're not doing that in an event like the retreat, if if the agent keeps getting caught, they get little benefits. I think it's called a shift system. The advantage starts to shift in their favor. They get new abilities, maybe more agents. I don't know what any of it is, but they get ways to help them. And if that agent keeps outsmarting the players, then the players start to get benefits to help them combat the agent. And so again, you're supposed to do this until you find the sweet spot between the skill levels. But of course, that means that everyone has to keep playing as the exact same roles every time. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. I have heard, I was talking to some folks afterwards, and they said, yeah, Mind Management is a really hard game to play to get into the hidden movement system. I have never played a hidden movement game before. I've always been intrigued by it. And man, this really killed my enthusiasm for this genre. I do still have Sniper Elite. I am hoping to get that played here at some point. But I'd almost have to say that my anticipation for that has kind of dwindled a little bit. That was Mind Management. Okay, almost done with Friday. We got into the late night. I talked about this in the last episode. We started getting into some crazy games in late night, as I have enjoyed doing. And we played a game called Jibber Jabble. Now, real quick, this game is not out yet. You can find it on Board Game Geek. I believe I have since heard that it has gotten picked up by Allplay and will be available at some point. I have no idea when. Luckily, Allplay doesn't really do a lot of Kickstarter kind of stuff, so you should be able to just buy it when this comes out. It's a very small box game, at least the prototype that I did see, but I didn't actually see that prototype until Sunday. Chris Yee, who knew of this game, said, oh, hey, you know what? Let's play Jibber Jabble. We don't even need the components for it. We're just going to grab the copy of Just One, which has cards that you can kind of use to generate a word. So if you've never seen Just One, it's just a deck of cards. It has 5 words on each card. A player will hold a card without looking at it, and they'll say 4, and that's the number that every player gets to work with. Now, real quick, in Just One, what you're doing as the other players, it's a cooperative game, and you're trying to come up with clues that are going to get the player, the active player, the one who doesn't know what the word is, to guess that word. They have to come up with that word using your clues. There's more to Just One. I won't go into it. In Jibber Jabble, you're doing the same thing. That player has a word. They're going to get specifically 3 clues from the other players around the table. But instead of just giving words, you're going to have to spell each word in turn order. So I had one. I didn't know what the word was, but I had given the word race, unbeknownst to myself, to my other players. The first player goes T. Now, they were thinking track. But the next player went U. And the first player went, that's not what okay. I don't know. Well, thankfully, they figured it out. They went T-U-R-N, turn. After those 4 players each give that letter, T-U-R-N, the 5th player can say stop. That's the end of that word, and then they can start the next word. They also gave a T, but thankfully the other players were on the same wavelength, and they went R-A-C-K, and at that point it had skipped over me. So I had turn and I had track. I was already starting to get the idea of a race. And then the next player went N-A-C. Oh, no, wait, S-C-A-R, NASCAR. That was the best play of Jibber Jabble that we had seen. And I promise I won't recount every single play, but I will tell you that on this Friday night, I have never laughed so hard in my life. Because the word was map. And the first player went G. And I was thinking globe. The second player said L. Oh, we're on the right path. Third player said O. Oh, yes, we are going to spell globe. Now, how map and globe, it's not necessarily a great clue, but it's fine. We're on the right path. The fourth player says G. What? Everyone at the table, what are you talking about? Now, you have a couple of options here. As the next player, the 5th player, can just ignore that letter. So, no, B, just forget that G. But they didn't. They thought, well, hey, things went off awry. We're back to G. Let's just start over again. So they said L. The next player says O, so now we had glow. And by the time we got to the 7th player, look, I have no idea what the hell's going on here. And they just said end and just shot that word down. And then, of course, I was like, no, we were working on something. Well, the 4th player thought we were trying to spell Google as in Google Maps. And maybe just, people had forgot how to spell Google. So he thought, well, I'm going to make an anagram out of this. And then the guesser can rearrange the letters in their head. But then the 5th player thought, no, we wanted to do globe. So we're going to start over again. And again, it's like you get this weird different people on different wavelengths trying to spell the same word, and absolute chaos ensues. And listening to some people going, what the hell have you just done? And the laughter at the frustration of, I have no idea what you're thinking about. Especially, I found that the second player has the hardest job because someone says L, and I'm sitting there, I cannot think of a single word that starts with an L that has to do with that clue. We did start to joke right away that there is safety in the letter E. We also, other emergent strategies come out of it. Like, again, if you just have no idea, but enough people going, yeah, come on, you got this. I don't got this. So I'm just going to repeat the letter that I just heard. We're going to have like a stutter in the middle of this word. We had that with the map clue. We had legend. This was, I started off this game, and even after my first experience, I thought, this is hysterical, this is great, but it doesn't need to be a game. We do not need to produce and buy this. But then I did get to see the prototype on Sunday. As I mentioned, I played it again, and they actually had the prototype, and it has some extra, it has the same thing. We have word cards with 5 numbers. You just call out the number, and that's the clue. But then it also came with some power cards like a Nix that lets you basically say, hey, I want you to skip that last letter. There was, I think, a skip. You can just skip your own turn. There was a whisper. You can whisper a clue to somebody. And there were a couple other cards. And so I could kind of see that they may actually make the game too easy. But depending on who you're playing with, maybe you can kind of tailor that experience. If you have, a group of people who know each other a lot better versus if you're kind of playing with random people, so on and so forth. I've changed my stance on this, and I do think that when it comes out, I will probably get myself a copy of Jibber Jabble. That was the end of Friday. I went to bed quite late before Saturday morning. All right, another long day of gaming awaited me on Saturday. I started off with a little game called Kill Dr. Lucky. I do not know anything about this game. I'd never heard about this game, but apparently it has been out for a long time and has gone through multiple iterations. The quick idea of this is that you are a group of people in a lavish kind of a mansion. It has a top-down floor plan of a building, kind of like along the lines of Clue, except that each room simply has a word in it. There's no other decorative features except for the room, doorways, and a hallway that connects some of these rooms. You're represented by a very simple-looking pawn piece, not even a meeple, just a little, sort of a pawn. And then there is a black, larger pawn that represents Dr. Lucky. And for whatever reason, you and all your fellow players are trying to kill Dr. Lucky. You're doing this by moving around the house, trying to not be seen by the other players, which means you either cannot share a room with them, nor can you be in a room adjacent to another player where they can see you through the doorway, even if there are multiple rooms that have doorways in between them that are on the same level. So if you've got rooms with an offset doorway, then you cannot see through, and if you're at least 2 rooms away from someone, you can take a turn, which is the equivalent of drawing a card or trying to attack Dr. Lucky. So if you're in a room with that character, that pawn, you can attempt to kill him. And you do that by simply declaring the attack. Ideally, you're going to have a weapon card. There are 3 different types of cards in the game: a movement card, a weapon card, and a fail card. If you have a weapon card, you will play it. You have a default power of 1 represented by your player character card in front of you, plus any weapons that you have. And that's going to give you an attack value. Other players are then going to try to foil you by simply playing cards that have these little clover symbols on them. And they may be on these fail cards, they may actually be on other weapon cards, etc. And they're going to simply discard cards in turn order around the table until they can either meet or exceed the value of your attack. And if they cannot do that, then you kill Dr. Lucky and you win the game. Really, really simple premise. I did not remember, at least initially, that you needed to have a weapon. I drew 1 weapon during the setup of the game. I never saw another weapon. So I played that weapon. I made the first attempt on Dr. Lucky's life. I was, of course, easily thwarted, as I only had, I think, a combat of 3. Not too hard to meet. And then I kind of kept following him around, but I was waiting to draw a weapon card. Now, again, you can't draw cards if anyone can see you, I believe, except for Dr. Lucky. I think if you're in a room with Dr. Lucky, you can grab a card. Maybe. I might be wrong on that. But there was one other aspect of this game, of this particular playthrough, that I thought was really, really cute. Apparently, there's a lot of little modules or expansions, or maybe just variants that are already in the box. I'm not sure. And one of them was a kitten. Unfortunately, it did not have a figure. It just had this little round wooden token. But if that cat, which you could move around the board anywhere you wanted, if that cat was in a room, it distracted all the players. And basically everyone in that room was focused on that cat, and you could either draw a card, which is kind of like grabbing a item from that room to use as a weapon. You could grab a candlestick, you could grab a chair or something. At one point, someone got a chainsaw and could use that as a weapon. So you could either grab a card, or you could try to attack Dr. Lucky if the other players were distracted by this cat. And at one point, when the players around the table taught me this, they had it set so that I was in the room with Dr. Lucky. Everyone else was sort of arranged around this cat. And just visually, it was hilarious to me seeing it there on the table. I had to get a picture of it. This game was great. It was fine. It was cute. I could see myself playing this with the right group of people. I don't really have that group of people. I think this was a great convention game. Not something I necessarily need to run out and get, but for the right group of players, they could have a lot of fun with Kill Dr. Lucky. The next game I played was Rats of Wistar. Again, I did not write down the designer or publisher of this game, but it is I believe a 2022 game. It's not that old, but it's already out of print. This is a game that to me almost reminded me of a board game version of Ratatouille, the Disney movie. And also had some elements that reminded me of the board game First Rat. And I won't cover First Rat, but in that game and Rats of Wistar, you play as a colony of rats, and you're sort of almost living in that cartoon environment where you're crafting things out of everyday household items. So you may make a suit of armor, which is basically just, a bottle cap and some little trinkets you found around the house and turned into a suit of armor. So it's very, very, thematic, sort of cartoonish, very, very cute. It's a worker placement game. There is an action wheel on the board with a number of tiles on it, and there are 3 areas around this action wheel. You're going to place one of your, it's either called a diplomat, I can't remember what the name of the character was, but it's a very tall, sort of a rat meeple. You're going to place it on an action spot on this wheel. That spot may give you a little bonus, but then the wheel itself is going to give you actions to take around this outer perimeter based on how many workers you have in that area. So there is a forest area, there's kind of an underground area, and there is a farm area. And one's going to let you, for example, in the forest, you can harvest wood, but in the underground area, you can use that wood to build a bed in the sort of rat colony that is represented on your own player board. So on your player board, you have a number of little little squares, which you can remove and open up more space. You also have a number of these beds with extra workers. When you open up a space and build a bed, you then get another worker that can go out into these 3 main areas on the board. And they're a smaller, kind of a rat-shaped meeple, very reminiscent of the one piece from the game of Root. And again, you're going around, you're collecting resources, you're trying to get technologies. Again, maybe you're going to research a body armor, and you're going to be able to, have a little bit more combat strength. There is an entire area of the board that represents a farmhouse. It has multiple floors. You can actually break into this house, gnaw your way through the doors of this house, and go into these different rooms and find little missions. And these missions may give you more resources. They may give you extra things that you can do. But to be able to overcome those missions, you're going to have symbols that are going to often come from the technology. So again, maybe that body armor that you built, that armor piece that you have researched is going to give you some brawn or some muscle, and you might use that then in a mission to get something done and collect extra resources. And of course, all of this is getting points. You're getting points from excavating deeper into your rat burrow. You're getting points from building more beds. You're getting points from possibly accomplishing those missions. You're getting points from the technologies that you research. And all of it came together in what I thought was a very, very clever, brilliant, and challenging game. There's kind of points from all over the place. A couple players did get very lucky towards the end of the game. They were able to suddenly excavate and or build a large number of beds. They got a bunch of points from that. I was kind of trying to focus on these missions in the house, which actually did not give me as many points as I had planned, but I did get a ton of technologies. You can really build some unique engines in this game. Whether they can fire off for you or not is the challenge. And I enjoyed this so much that I ordered a copy, and I believe it also actually delivers here today. I am really looking forward to having some more time to play Rats of Wistar. All right, up next, I'm going to introduce a very, very dear friend of mine. This is Liz Chapman. I adore Liz very much, and her husband, Chappie Chapman, who I did play with on Sunday. I mentioned to Liz that one of the games I've really been interested in lately, I've been having a lot of fun with, I've talked about it here in the channel quite a bit, is adulthood. And a couple people seeing my enthusiasm for adulthood suggested that I check out Pursuit of Happiness. This was produced back in 2015 by Stronghold Games, ironically, under the management of Stephen Bonacore, who was also there at the Dice Tower Retreat, who I was also hanging out with as well. Pursuit of Happiness is a worker placement game where you're trying to live a life. You start off as a teenager, you go through several rounds as an adult, and then you're going to have 3 final rounds of old age, all of which you might not survive. There is a stress track, and certain things throughout the game are going to cause you to gain stress. If you have too many things in your life that you're trying to juggle, you can basically have 3 things: a job, 1 or more projects, or a partner. And if you have 3 of any combination of those things, or I should say more than 3, you're going to gain stress. If you try to do too many things in the same round of the game, if I keep trying to go and buy more stuff, that might stress me out. If I try to take on too many projects, that might stress me out. There are also group projects where you can try and help other players with a project and gain a bunch of benefits. But again, if you do that too much in a turn, you might get stressed out. And then when you hit those old age years, each of those old age rounds is going to add more stress. And eventually the last round will add 9 stress, which will certainly, if not already, push you off the track and you die. And if you do die due to the stress track, even in the middle of a round, you're out of the rest of the game. Now, luckily, in the old age aspect of things, as you get further down that stress track, you actually get less time to spend as actions. And so in our particular game, I played this with Liz and our friend Eric. He died in the previous round, the second to last round, the penultimate round. And Liz and I only had like 2 action pawns left. Actually, I think she had 4, but she had to spend 2 of them on her family, which I thought was kind of funny. I didn't have a family or a job, and so I had all 4 of my action pawns to do with as I please. And I think I built a pool, and I think I went skydiving or something like that. Maybe hot air ballooning. I don't remember. And that's really what this whole game is. You're taking on these jobs. You're getting, or I should say, a project. You can go and get a job. You can go and get a partner. You can actually sort of progress a lot of these cards that kind of have rows of progress. And so you can actually work on the card to further that progress. You may be spending the various resources along the way. You've got money and knowledge, interaction, and creativity. You're spending those resources to advance these various projects. As I mentioned, there were group projects. And I want to mention that because the first group project that Liz played in our teenage round was a music band. She wanted to start a band, and she was the lead singer. Eric took on the role of I think he was the keyboardist. You can contribute multiple times to these projects, up to 2. And so I was the guitarist and the band manager. And since we had fully completed that project, we got the full benefit of it for each one of our contributions to that project. And one of the things that we got was money. And it was something like 9 money, which means I got that twice. And so I was going into my early adulthood years with a ton of cash. And I managed to actually play the rest of that game without ever getting a job. I lived off of that wealth. I did also get a project of running a Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign. In fact, it wasn't a Kickstart. I did a Punch Start. I did a Punch Start campaign, which also gave me more money. I took on another project of trying to make an invention. I was trying to invent something. I did get that finished, and that gave me a little bit more money at the end. And that's what this whole game was trying to kind of manage these resources. You almost have to have something of a circular engine. This card's giving me knowledge. This project costs me knowledge, but maybe it gives me interaction. I'm going to use this interaction over here to advance this track. Maybe it's going to give me money. I'm going to use that money to buy these activities. Because I wasn't, managing all these other things, because I wasn't taking on a job, I didn't have a family, none of that stuff was costing me money. I just went and bought all these little projects. I had a miniature collection. I had a game room. I was an avid kart driver, kart racer. I had a motorcycle that I had upgraded. All this stuff, because at the end of the game, there were a couple of sort of public objectives that you could lead, and I was actually leading in 2 of those 3. And I really, really enjoyed this. If you can't tell, I really enjoyed this for the fact that I really was able to play my way. Now, I find the theming, the art, especially the pop culture references out of adulthood, far more entertaining than in Pursuit of Happiness. Pursuit of Happiness was kind of more generic art. And while you certainly had things like, you could buy board games, you could create a game. Again, you could, join a band, you could be a musician. There was a job that came out as a music composer, mentioning Luthier. That was certainly of interest to me, although I didn't want a job. But while all that was there, I did really enjoy it for the fact that, again, in adulthood, you kind of have to have a job. And in fact, you're supposed to get a partner, and you're even encouraged to marry that partner because of some of the end game scoring criteria. I like that in Pursuit of Happiness, I could play the game however I wanted. And while I didn't win this, I was just 2 points behind Liz. Even Eric wasn't that far behind us, having died a little early, unfortunately for Eric. The one thing that was a little bit of a bummer is that the only way that you can go significantly forward on the stress track is to get a health symbol. Now, Liz and I were able to draft a card that gave us a health reward if we fully progressed that card. We both did so, and that bumped us up enough on the health track, or on the stress track, I should say, that we were able to weather that second round of old age. Another card never came out in time for Eric to do that. And so literally, he died early in the game because he just could not get the card that he needed. There was no way that we could see to just go and find a card. He was just really at the mercy of the shuffle. And that was a little disappointing. However, I have since learned that there are a number of expansions for this game. They increase the ability to find those symbols, could probably make it easier to even survive the final round of the game. And that I think that's how I would like to explore this game. So I'm actually trying to order a copy of the Pursuit of Happiness big box, which gives you a number of those expansions built right into it, and we could possibly explore some of those systems. Now, I have also heard that they can increase the AP of the game, and this is the game because there's so many different things to consider, so many different cards you can acquire. Trying to find the synergy between them can really bog things down if you're really leaning hard into it. And so I'm a little concerned about that, although I think, again, like maybe in a 2-player experience, that might still be an awful lot of fun. And so I'm hoping to check out Pursuit of Happiness a little further. The last game of Saturday, and actually just about the last game of this list, was Tea Garden. This is from Tomasz Olek. This was produced, I believe, from Capstone Games. I might be wrong on that, but it came out at the same time as Galileo Galilei. So this was announced just within, I think, the past year, sort of a trio of games that he had his name on. Tea Garden is a very, very Euro game, although a very pretty Euro game. Lots of pinks and reds and vibrant colors out of this, where you're trying to run a tea enterprise. You are placing tea garden tiles across these different regions of this board, I believe set in ancient China or Japan, if I recall. I might be wrong on that as well. I was trying to teach this, and so I couldn't really lean too much into the theme. I was trying to read the rulebook and quickly convey the rules to my other players. But anyways, you've got a number of regions on this board. You're putting out these tea garden tokens at the end of each round. Each tea garden is going to generate 2 tea leaves based on the level of that region. The regions run from, I believe, 2, maybe 3, all the way up to 6. And so towards the end of the game, I had a bunch of tea gardens out there. And at the end of each round, I would get a ton of these green tea leaves. You're taking actions in this. You're going to have multiple rounds. I think 5 rounds that you play. You can have up to 4 actions per round. 3 of them you can just take. The 4th one has an extra cost if you want to take that 4th action. You're going to have a hand of cards. The cards have a strength in the top left corner and possibly extra symbols in the middle. You're going to play any number of cards that you want to each of the 3 or 4 slots on your player board to take an action. The number of the strength of those cards dictates how well you can take that action. So, for example, to build your first tea garden, you started with one already out there. So to build technically your second tea garden was a cost of 3. So you had to play any number of cards that added up to or beyond the level of 3 to then take a tea garden and play it out. You could also buy new cards from the bottom of the board, and again, each slot that a card sat at had an increasing strength value. Cards also required you to have tea, and the tea symbols were a little harder to get. You could buy a wild one by spending a whole bunch of your tea leaves. Some of the cards would also give you a tea symbol, so it's quite expensive to be able to buy more cards. There was also a river that runs through the board, and there's just a number of spaces along that river track. You're possibly able to move a little boat token further along that river. It didn't seem to have any connection to the game itself. Just, again, the further you get up that boat, or up that river, you're going to get various bonuses as you go, and then there's an end game score associated with those spaces. And there was also a tea market. You could fulfill orders selling your tea. There was also an Emperor track that you could climb up to possibly get some unique Emperor cards that would give you a lot of endgame scoring. Again, just one of those point salad kind of games. Lots of different things going on. The one system that was kind of neat, kind of interesting, was that the green tea leaves at the end of each round, they declined, they sort of decayed in their value, and everything would slide down a space. But you could take an action to ferment your tea leaves, literally flipping these little tokens over to a brown side, and fermented tea increased in its value throughout the game. So at the end of each round, your green tea leaves went left and your brown tea leaves went right, although we rarely ever had any brown tea leaves left from round to round because they were costs for an awful lot of these various actions. So if you wanted to, for example, get a teapot symbol to buy cards, you spent your brown tea leaves. If you wanted to take that 4th action on your player board, you had to spend a brown tea leaf. And so I rarely ever had brown tea leaves left over at the end of the round. I did enjoy this game. Generally, I did like it. We were actually quite surprised as I was teaching it. We were learning, okay, you got to play any number of cards. You only start with 4 cards in your hand. You get 4 new cards at the beginning of each round, in addition to any you may have left over. We thought, how the heck are you ever going to have any cards left over? I mean, I'm going to spend 2 or 3 of them just to take my first action. How am I ever going to be able to get more cards? Except for that, then you quickly realize, well, some of the actions don't require much of a very high cost. You don't need a lot of strength. as you buy new cards from the market or take the Emperor cards, they go directly into your hand. So I was actually focused in my first round to buy a card, although it took me a ton of turns to get it done. And then you suddenly get to a point where you have tons of cards. You're still trying to play them in the right order. You're still got, again, there's a lot of that efficiency required out of each one of your actions. But it was a pretty thinky game. I did enjoy this. Again, the sort of Euro-y point salad, not quite as thematic as it might look, aspect of it was a little bit of a turnoff. I don't think I'm going to get this game, but I did really quite enjoy my play of it. Again, a very, very pretty game. That was Tea Garden. On Sunday, I was only there for a couple of hours. I played a quick round of Bomb Busters. I mentioned that in the last episode. I also played a game of Jibber Jabble. I mentioned that. I was invited to that game by Joey Evans of the Dice Tower, and I literally had come into the room to get something. Joey stopped me and he said, "Hey, we're going to play a game." And I said, "No, I've got to do something." And actually, I'm kind of getting ready to leave. And he goes, "Oh, we're going to play Jibber Jabble." Oh, well, okay, I'll play it one more time. And then I forgot to pick up the item I was going in there to retrieve. That worked itself out later on. But anyways, that was the 14 or slightly more of the rest of the games that I played at the Dice Tower Retreat 2025 in Orlando, Florida. Hey, I hope you enjoyed these videos. As I mentioned, a couple of these games are coming in, so I'm going to probably cover them again in the future in other episodes of the Weekly Ratchet, so be sure to keep an eye out for those. Also, in the last episode, I mentioned the game of Ink, which I have a review copy of, so there will be a full-fledged video of that coming out at some point. Keep an eye out for that as well. Until any of those, thank you always for watching, and I will catch you for a regularly numbered episode of the Weekly Ratchet in the days coming soon. Thanks for watching, folks. Cheers.